site for which you have the address, and we have simultaneous interpretation, 1 for German, 2 for English, 3 for French, and you can scroll through the channels on the display in front of you. There's also a brief biography for all the speakers with us today on the copy being sent round in French and English. And I'm Martin Vesnier. I'm a young ambassador of the Franco-German Youth Office. I'm also a former Franco-German eco-volunteer.
Merci. Et c'est donc dans ce cadre-là que j'ai participé l'an dernier.
Thank you. So that was how I got involved in writing the appeal to political leaders from the Franco-German youth movement. You've got a copy before you. That's part of the e-participation project, the first cross-border bilingual project with online participation in Europe. And specifically it was geared up to teenagers and young adults, and there was a video competition and an online consultation which took about 10 months, which was started by the Franco-German Youth Office, which saw about 1,000 young people take part, post their contribution, vote online for the 95 most relevant proposals, and these 95 proposals related to 9 great large topics: education, employment, the environment, the economy, cultural diversity, young people's unemployment, media, family, and also political involvement, which is what we're talking about today. So these young people wanted to bring forward these 95 proposals to political leaders, and it was my honour to convey this appeal from young people to the youth and European affairs ministers of France and Germany when we marked the anniversary, the 50th anniversary of setting up the Franco-German Youth Office. Now, the common theme is Europe is our future if. And to give you a specific example of one of the proposals on political involvement, I'm just going to run through one of these proposals headed Better Education in Politics for the Public, which is on page 15. And Europe, it is said, will be a future if something like the Federal German Agency for Political Education can do its job of informing the public about politics and giving explanations relating to complex issues so everyone can understand them. And if that agency is emulated elsewhere in Europe. Some people don't vote in the European elections in France and Germany because they're not well enough informed. The media needs to inform us about the work of European politicians, MEPs. So that's one of the proposals on the table. And I can also tell you that the Franco-German Youth Office also recently provided its support to Voting and You, which is a project to do with political education online. And the idea was to make a comparison between the answers users gave to 30 questions on significant political issues, and to compare them with the answers given by the main political parties to those same questions as part of the current campaign in the context of the European elections. We wanted this round table to be as open as possible and to be as participatory as possible, so please feel free to ask questions or make comments for speakers. And you have to press the micro or mic button if you want to speak. You can also put questions on Twitter, which should be displayed on the overhead projector screen. We haven't got much time, however, so what I would ask is that speakers should be fairly concise when they take the floor. As far as the speakers go, they're all involved in organisations aiming to get people more involved. Some are more informal and innovative, some are more institutional, some are NGOs or charities, and Jan Peters, a member of the Young Europeans, sends his apologies because he can't join us today. Before all that then, I'll start by hearing from the point of view of an academic who is the political science director at Sedipov, and you're going to be talking about political behaviour. That's your subject, how young people relate to politics in a national context and in a comparative way at a European level. Now, are you picking up disparities in terms of how young people relate to politics at a European level? Particularly, are there differences between Germans and French young people? Thank you. Well, it's a big pleasure for me to have the opportunity to be part of this exchange of views with a room which is full of young people who are thinking through the future of Europe and looking at the notion of a political Europe and the involvement of citizens that could be part of that political Europe, and that's important on the eve of the European elections. Youth in Europe has a relationship to politics which is somewhat ambivalent. I'm one of the researchers who, in light of surveys, reject the idea that young people are depoliticised, that young people are interested by a number of topics and campaigns in politics. I would say that young people have a different relationship to politics, and we need to be sensitive to that different relationship. I'm going to try and keep it brief because I don't think you're giving me much time here. I think the hallmark of citizenship for the younger generations today is trifold. So it's a triptych. There is a lot of distrust in politics and political institutions. There's a lot of distrust towards any institutions in politics, and that lack of trust isn't necessarily a negative thing because it's really calling for more democracy, and that really promotes democratic vitality. So there is that lack of trust. There's also a second part of the triptych, which is the relationship with regard to voting and electoral behaviour, which has undergone deep-seated change. You see people not turning out to vote. People are using abstention, not to say that they don't care about politics or joint decision-making. Rather, it's all part of this mistrust. It's a political message. Abstention is a political message to say what you're proposing doesn't interest us. And the third part of the triptych is a protest attitude. I think in Germany and France alike, young people are taking up a number of different methods of protest. Just skimming through the latest survey from Eurobarometer given over to young people in Germany and France, protest is a means of political expression which has involved about a third of young people, at least of those who answered the survey. So I think there is some common ground there. I would finish off by saying that there may be common ground between young people in France and Germany, but there are some specific local features. Young French people indisputably are much more critical towards political institutions and feel much more remote from traditional political bodies such as trade unions or political parties. And they really don't want to become involved in those institutions except on a very small minority basis. However, on the German side of the equation, there's significantly more commitment to the political institutions and a willingness to get involved in these traditional organisational structures in the field of politics, whether we're talking about political parties or trade unions. There's appreciably more willingness to do that. So I think there's a big difference, and another significant difference comes from the socio-economic situation. French young people are faced with very significant difficulties in terms of getting a job or getting any economic independence or their own house, whereas young Germans, I wouldn't say they don't face that problem at all, but the question of unemployment in Germany isn't at all the same as in France. I'm sorry, I'm sure I took too much time, but I just wanted to fill in the backdrop of the debate. Thank you. Mathieu Kahn, you are the Deputy Mayor of Strasbourg, and you're the Treasurer of the National Association for the Youth Councils, and you run one such council in Strasbourg. Can you give us a presentation of how young people become involved in a youth council? Thank you. Well, since I'm from the region, I should welcome you to Strasbourg, and I hope you have 3 pleasant days in our city. It might take a little long to sum up how youth councils work, but I just wanted to home in on a few guiding principles. Youth or children's councils are just one means of participation amongst others, and the idea of a council means that we shouldn't reduce the involvement of young people just to these councils. We do a lot of things in public policy for young people, but we do less with young people, and still less do we allow young people to do things themselves. So when we talk about involvement in the councils, what we're saying that we shouldn't just do things for young people, but with them and empowering them to do things themselves. A second principle, well, let me just give you a sentence from October 98 at the Congress of these councils, and it's something that informs our actions in Strasbourg. It says that involvement in local and regional political life in Strasbourg, Europe and the world is a way of involving them in society and demonstrating peace and solidarity. A lack of communication or any contempt even can be the source of things like racism and so on. So there's a strong political conviction in forming our activities. Another couple of points. I come back to what you were saying about depoliticisation. What is our guiding ethos in terms of involvement is that for Strasbourg, I would say, there's a lack of trust in any kind of overarching ideology. People aren't willing to sign up to a global ideology now, be that political or in any other field. That's people falling out of love with political parties and disaffection for large popular organisations or other organisations which previously shaped the involvement of young people in politics. That doesn't mean that young people are rejecting politics. It doesn't mean that they're not interested in what's going around them or they have no values. It's just that they tend to become involved in specific limited issues rather than signing up to an overarching ideology, and that's another way which shapes our organisation of these activities to involve young people. In terms of Strasbourg, without getting into the details of how things work, because you've got a consultation process and other activities in the council where we try and get young people to do things for themselves, we are keen on allowing people to experiment and try things out, and that means letting people fail. You can't talk about people being allowed to try things out without allowing them to fail. So whenever we set something up, some political or public activity, we allow young people to try and run these activities, and they learn by being involved in things that fail. They have to draw the necessary conclusions from such a failure. And from that, we want to expand the involvement of young people to all topics, not just young people's issues. Traditionally, young people are involved in a conversation or a debate about problems that affect them directly. So leisure time, getting a job, moving around other countries. But we want to open up consultation to all public policies and allow them to learn by doing. So we have steering committees which deal with urban planning issues in the city, and there, in the same way as other local councillors, you will have young people of between 11 and 20 years of age as members of the steering committee, because we think they've got an expertise. You've got architects and planners, but you've got the people who use these public spaces on a daily basis. So they have specific ideas. They're today's users, and they're the residents of our city of tomorrow. So we are putting out these big urban planning projects, wagering that young people will become more involved as a result. For example, we redevelop certain squares in parts of Strasbourg. In Alsace, you have a lot of square, neat and tidy spaces, but young people say, well, we've got people who want to skateboard and so on. Why can't we put in place some skateboarding facilities in these squares rather than them getting shouted at when they try and skateboard in these areas? So we put in place some street furniture like that. I'm not sure our great architects and engineers had thought about that, but young people told us, look, we like to skateboard nearby. If you gave us some skating facilities nearby, then we could do that.
Well, thank you very much. That shows the contribution that the cities can make to young people. And now, turning to the other side of the Rhine, Barbara Schmidt, you work for Youth for Europe, and you ensure that the Erasmus Plus program is implemented in Germany. So, what is it that enables Erasmus Plus to improve young people's participation and their contribution? Yes, that's quite exciting to be sitting here and to see that Erasmus Plus is actually directed at young people of your age. Maybe I can tell you a few things you can take home for us, ideas for implementing European programs. Now, I'm not sure if over the last few weeks, months you've followed this, but there is a new European education program called Erasmus+. This takes some of the lifetime learning programs from Comenius and has merged it with Erasmus. So it's now called Erasmus+. That means that we're looking at education programs for young people, for adults, and for lifelong learning. This is also a part of Youth in Action. We're talking about non-formal education that takes place outside the classroom or outside university lecture halls. Means young people from different countries coming together, putting projects or initiatives together. This is all the program that we're putting into place in Germany. So the idea of participation is one of our key priorities in our program. That means that these projects carried out by you or by youth organizations which concentrate on active citizenship for young people, those are the kind of projects which will get priority funding from us. Let me give you a couple of examples of that. One of these are transnational youth initiatives. That means that as a young person, you don't need to belong to an association or a club. That means you can come together with young people from other young people from other countries and get some funding from the program to put your projects into place. For example, something about European identity. These are the kinds of ideas where you can take hold of your own European project and put it into place. The other project is a bit more political, and this is what we call the structured dialogue. This is where young people meet with European policymakers, whether it be at national level or European level, and they can discuss with policymakers about European issues. So these are two possibilities under this program in order to get young people active and to get them involved. And perhaps in closing I should say that there's lots of skills building for young people. That means that young people who are involved in projects in this program learn a lot of things. They can learn new skills, not just skills for the employment market, but also skills more connected to their own personal and social development. Thank you. Now, Anne-Julie Clary. Now, you have founded the firm Safe Planet, which is about setting up participative processes, especially for young people. Could you perhaps give us some specific examples of your innovative ways of surveying or consulting young people? Well, I'll come back to what we generally say about participative experiences with young people. Often these are very positive, but they can be difficult to put into place. And at the moment, in the run-up to the European elections, we're also wondering about young people getting involved in the democratic process. And obviously, democratic process is participation par excellence. That really is the best example of it. In France, we also want to ensure that we work together with young people's organizations in order to encourage people to take part in the democratic process. And we've also been thinking about what young people think about when it comes to voting, and how are they going to be encouraged or motivated to go out and vote. So we've set up a body in France which is going to think about getting young people involved and what solutions we can put into place to encourage young people to turn up and vote. As I say, there's a sort of politics seems to turn young people off, and this creates a sort of anti-democratic trends, and we have to see how young people actually want to express themselves. And there are perhaps other alternative forms of democracy which are developing. So this observatory, if you like, is following 1,750 young people between the local elections which took place in March this year and the European elections. So we'll be looking at what those people's hopes are, what their fears are, and we'll be talking about those people who are 15 to 17 years old, what we call pre-voters, and those people who are voting for the first time between the ages of 18 and 25. One of the first elements which came out of our observation is that when it comes to actually voting itself, young people really like this idea of going into and putting their piece of paper in the ballot box. And they're very proud to be able to go and vote. And you really sort of take ownership of the polling station in a way. So it's very important that when it comes to analysing the importance of what it means to vote. Then along the lines of your call you're putting out to young people, we want to ensure that young people seem to be interested in referendums, in direct citizen participation in decision making. That's the first thing which crops up. The second thing is organising debates in schools with the idea of political education, of organising debates. The third factor is improving the voting system itself. Voting, say, 2 weeks in advance because you're studying elsewhere and you can't get back home and vote. Obviously, people like to vote themselves rather than giving a proxy to somebody else. And going into the polling station is an important event. And obviously, if you can vote on a more flexible timescale, that would be perhaps more useful. And then one of the points in your project is the idea of using internet voting advice application. They worked pretty well in previous elections we've had. And young people like those because it's all part of the idea of political education and of modern active political participation. And there are solutions such as compulsory voting, the counting of abstention. Those are some of the things that came out of the first survey which we carried out. Those are the kind of ideas which are getting a bit closer to what people actually feel when they're going out to vote. We are afraid that young people aren't going to turn out and vote. They want to abstain. And we want to know the reasons for that. Before I take some questions on the floor, I'll just introduce our last speaker, Mark Ludwig, and then we'll open the floor for the debate. Now, Mark Ludwig, you work in city development in a social pedagogical institute in Berlin, and there you set up projects for participation. So what do you think internet and IT can contribute to encourage young people to participate in politics? Well, I'd also like to thank you very much for this invitation. I think it's great to be able to come here, although it's a long way from Berlin. And I'm all the more pleased to see so many young people here, and that I hope you've got some questions for us. But I hope that we can also raise your interest in some of our work. Now, I work in an organisation in Berlin, and last year we put into place an e-participation project where we asked young people in a certain area of Berlin, what would you like to change? We had a website, we had a campaign, and people expressed their desire for change. And the young people said they wanted to come up with some projects, and we ensured that the political decision makers, like the people in charge of the parks or youth assistants, were able to take part in these projects. Now, youth participation is a very important part of all this. In my preparation for today, I've put some figures together. Now, as you know, that young people mainly participate in their immediate local surroundings. So we have a voluntary survey every 5 years. In 2009, for 14 to 30-year-olds, 34% of people made a commitment. And this was mainly in sport and schools and culture and music and leisure time and culture and religion. It's a little bit less than that. As regards the areas where we need to make an impact, that's perhaps in schools, because that's where you see the most of self-organized commitment, as we call it. Now, as you may know, you can get involved by what we call the non-formal education, and you want to get some of those skills recognized that you learn in non-formal education. One young person in 2 who answered this survey say that they would like to get qualifications. 53% of people said that. Obviously, what we really want is for young people to take responsibility and treat young children or treat young people as adults. This is all part of self-development, it's important that the young people should be allowed to put these projects in place themselves. Now, why am I telling you all of this? Well, it's because I also take part in voluntary work myself in a Germany-wide organization whose aim it is to get young people involved in youth initiatives, to bring young people together, and to ensure that these people can get qualifications and for further education. So we hope that they set themselves. One of the main arguments for getting involved in the first place is that one person in 2 intends to play an active role in deciding which way society is going via their political or voluntary activity. And that's a way of creating a sense of belonging, which is very important as well.
Dankeschön.
Thank you. Now, are there any questions from the floor? You can also ask questions via Twitter using the EP Guest Wi-Fi network. The username is i2014 and the password is IDs. You have the floor, sir.
Actually, I would like to ask about why are you discussing about the youth? We are the youth. We are in front of you. Why don't you ask us some things? You're talking about some pater things. You don't ask us questions. We came to discuss with you guys. We didn't came to hear about all your stuff. Sorry, but I don't want to hear anymore. So can we take a debate here? So if you, I don't know, stop what you're doing up there and let us talk.
Okay. Ah, pardon. Justement, si vous avez...
Well, yes, if you have any comments to make or questions, then there's no problem with that. We've got an hour ahead of us now to have an exchange, have a debate. Well, my comment was about abstention in the European elections. I think there are 2 points we need to look at here. If you want to get interested in politics, you also have to ensure that young people actually want to get interested in politics. I'm not sure if you saw the most recent campaign carried out by the European Parliament for the elections. Well, I didn't really understand it at all. This slogans react, impact, act. Well, we managed to get some documents from the European Parliament which we handed out, and the feedback we got was quite clear. People said, we don't understand this at all. It's written very small. It's a vote on the 25th of May. I don't think this is encouraging young people to get interested in European politics. And maybe it's the format of the European Parliament itself, but that's another debate perhaps. But often we talk about MEPs, they're being presented as the modem MEP, or say what party they're from and not what country they're from. Now, I'm studying law, and when I speak to students, we don't really know what we're talking about. Is it because we lack information, whether it be at the local or European level, or is it just because we're not interested? But whichever it is, there is a major problem here. And it's quite normal, therefore, that you get this abstention that's probably going to happen in the next elections.
Une mauvaise communication,
So probably the communication's going wrong and there's not enough clear information coming through from the European institutions. I don't know if speakers or participants want to react to that. Microphone.
Donc justement pour rebondir.
Well, to come back on that point a colleague was just talking about, I asked some secondary school kids and they said they were very poorly informed about the European elections, so perhaps we need teams to go into schools to inform students there. I think the whole concept of the European elections is very difficult to follow, even though it has an impact on our life. I think the way the European Union works is something that we need to know about.
Oui.
My name is Lucia. Can you hear me? Yes, perfect. I'm from Slovakia, but I now was participating in one European project, which is called Europe on Track. And basically within this project, we were a team of 3 people traveling around Europe by Interrail, by train, and we were asking young people whether they will vote or not vote in the upcoming elections. And we did kind of a small survey in Saint-Étienne in France, and we were posing the young people these questions. Out of 25 people, 2 people said that they will actually vote. One person said because he is interested in a European issue, and another person said because he has the right to vote. He didn't specify. He didn't know anything about the elections. And my question is like, do you have some communication channel with young people, or where you got this information you are presenting to us? Because from my experience, from talking to young people, it was totally different. And the basic problem which they see, and which I see as well, is that the political parties, they don't communicate with young people. There is no clear channel. You have information about everything, about how they want to change the politics and so on. There is no such a, they cannot really see impact on the young generation. How do you think that this can be tackled?
Mark Ludwig, vielleicht könnt ihr etwas darüber sagen.
Can you say something about that, Mark Ludwig? My personal answer to that question is this, more or less. For institutions and associations, I think there is a role to play as the middlemen between politicians and young people. There are projects set up for that. We had EU18 for the elections to inform young people who are voting for the first time. And there's something for the European elections now, U18.org. And France and Spain were partner countries in a exchange on this, and there was an exchange of ideas about how we can work locally to organise voting stations for young people who are voting for the first time. And I think this is really the job of us as institutions, as associations, and for your projects. I think we all have to be in the middle between the politicians and the young people, and to try and get young people to speak to each other as peer-to-peer conversations. We need them to translate some of these political messages so that people understand them. just to react to that and give an example, I think peer-to-peer communications is really important. I think the big institutions are not the best ones today to tell us how to communicate, how to talk to young people if you want to get them involved. A specific example, in Strasbourg in 2011 we were wondering about how to get young people to vote in two elections, the presidential elections and the parliamentary elections. So we had this huge brainstorming exercise with 50-odd young people, and we didn't get anywhere. So we wondered what to do. Well, they suggested, give us the budget that you've put aside and we'll do it. And we did that, and they produced a clip about voting. You can find it on YouTube and so on. And it really was a big hit. There were 50 young people from Strasbourg who put this together, and it was screened in cinemas, in concerts, and wherever young people were at that time. It was 25 seconds most that we could expect people to pay attention to if it's coming in before a film or a concert. So that's what we did. Barbara Schmidt. I'd like to answer that too. In terms of what we see in this European programme, and I think this is something that you can all confirm, is that if you're involved in a project, then the perspective changes completely. And we've found this in studies, that young people who are involved in a European project, such as Youth in Action, and I'm sure this would apply to other European programmes, in fact feel much more like European citizens, and they take a much bigger interest in European politics and society and being involved. You're all here, so perhaps you also had one of those light bulb moments in your life, perhaps in a European project or some other experience in your life. So I'd agree with what Mark Ludwig said. We've got some very positive experience from using peer-to-peer projects, when young people can go to other young people and say, look, this is what you can do in Europe, this is what Europe makes possible. Then you have a much bigger impact than when politicians or agencies try and advise young people. So if you get this chance to act as a multiplier, we'd certainly encourage you to do that. That means you as young people having a really big impact on other young people in Europe. You know, you can't imagine the potential.
Oui.
Go ahead.
Gut. Ja, ich würde noch mal gerne auf diesen Mobilität.
I want to just talk about this mobility thing. We've got some guidance here on paper. Mrs. Schmidt, you mentioned Erasmus Plus. I'm not sure about this. In Germany, there was the Bologna process and the G8 and other bodies involved in this. I wonder whether politics, society or business wants to promote European mobility. In France, I found a lot of young French people got a bachelor's degree at 21, a master's degree at 22, and I wonder whether they've got the time left financially to take a year or two off to travel, and whether that would be recognised. If business tells us it wouldn't be recognised in our CV, then it stops there. So I wonder, are we prepared to take a year to be involved in Europe, or will we be disadvantaged when it comes to later employment if we take that time off?
Ja, genau. Also die Frage.
Well, Bologna and formal education is a difficult question for me to answer, because I'm from the non-formal side of education, from youth work rather than schools or universities in that programme. But fundamentally, the whole Erasmus Plus programme has quite a lot of extra money compared to the previous programme. So at a European level, the member states and the institutions have shown that they're really keen to see a lot of young people taking part in the programme and going abroad and using these mobility measures. In terms of what that does to your personal CV and this stress to finish your degree as soon as possible, I completely take your point. It's not that long ago that I studied myself at university, but I can confirm it's very difficult to try and do these two things. On the one hand, you want to go to other countries. On the other hand, you want to complete your education and get a job. From my own personal experience of mobility programs, I would always encourage you to take the time out to do these programs. And I think in the national agency it was helpful for me when I applied for the job in the agency. I think the simple fact that I'd been involved in political youth work as a volunteer and in cultural work was a much bigger factor in me getting the job than my degree. So studying for an extra year or so wasn't the key to getting a job, but my involvement as a volunteer and my involvement in Erasmus was all very important to me getting the job. So use the opportunity Europe gives you. I know this personally. I think you gain from it personally. It's not just about the labour market. You're all here. You've got friends and contacts in Europe. You've had personal benefits from Europe, and I don't think you should underestimate it. Well, thank you. We've had a question on Twitter whether the political parties are compatible with peer-to-peer communication. Do you want to answer that, Anne? So what do you mean peer-to-peer? You mean between young people? I'm not sure I'm best placed to answer that one. Certainly, to begin answering that, for the political parties at least, a lot of effort has to be made to be able to communicate and discuss with young people. Young people really don't have any trust in political parties, and there's a big generational divide. I'm not so familiar with the situation in Germany about this, but in France certainly there's a huge problem in terms of turnover in the political classes, with the age of the people who hold political offices, the age of politicians and so on. So I really think political parties have got a great deal to do if they want to keep greater trust on the part of young people. I don't think it's a big difference, but I would say it's 1 to 2% of French people who are part of a political party, and perhaps 5% in a trade union. It's more in Germany, but I think you need to have these figures in mind to see that there's a huge gulf, a really big gap between political parties, representative bodies on the one hand, and young people on the other. And since I've got the floor, and I'm going to give it back straight away, I think it's very important in this conversation that we're having together to bear in mind that the things we're talking about here, the lack of trust, people not going to vote, what people think about Europe, people not going to vote in the European elections, and young people really don't vote much in the European elections, but older adults don't vote much in the European elections either. So all these things, I would say, let's not say that it's all about young people being put in a little image box in terms of how they relate to politics. It's not as if they're completely cut off from everything else that's going on in society and the public at large. I think that's an important point. Thank you. Well, what I often note with the existing arrangements to get people involved is that it goes no further than consultation very often. Young people and citizens are just consulted. It doesn't go further. And I think we need to give more power. We need to put in place some budgets to allow more empowerment. I think we need to think about things at that level. Would anyone else like to take the floor? Over there, perhaps.
Alors ma question c'est à quelle jeunesse on s'adresse?
What young people are you talking about is my question. You talk about young people, it's a difficult concept for me. Are we talking about secondary school students, sixth form students, someone looking for a job, someone who's working, someone who's a student? Young people aren't all the same. So how can people deal with that? I can understand it's difficult to communicate with young people if there's so many different types of young people. How can these political organisations coordinate on that? If Europe's taking the lead here, then perhaps they should coordinate these initiatives. There will be different ones for people who are in secondary school to those who are in jobs and so on. And I think you have to ask, if communication is that difficult, which young people are we talking about? I don't know if any of the speakers or other people in the audience want to answer. Well, I think you're right to make this point, that we're not talking about one youth, but several groups of youth. Youth is split into different groups, and there are very different forms of behaviour and communication and different ideas about the future amongst those groups. Mark Ludwig. You raise a really important question. It's a question which is a bit difficult for us. It's the challenge that we face. Youth organisations such as the German Federal Youth Organisation in the member states are organised as associations, and you don't have any associations which just get involved in associations or projects generally across schools. On a general basis, they tend to be much more focused. It's an umbrella organisation for young people that the German government would involve in such ideas. So I think you need to look at that. How do we ensure that local initiatives and local projects can be implemented by young people?
Bonjour.
Earlier we were talking about youth, but what do we mean by youth? What's the definition of youth? What age does it start at? And so on. And then sometimes it seems like we're being lumped together in a box by society, and how do we become part of society? How do we become integrated in society? And I also think Europe is too remote from young people or the public generally. It's hard for people to see how Europe is useful on that basis. If we don't know what Europe's doing for us, what's the point of voting in the elections? We only hear about Europe when it's election time. When it's not election time, we hear nothing. So I really think if you're only there when it's elections, then young people aren't really going to say yes. We're going to think that you're not really working for us, you're not really there for us, except at election times. So I think that Europe needs to get closer to Europe's population for people to take an interest, and for people to know what Europe is actually doing, what it's there for. And if you're a member of the national parliament, perhaps you're closer to us than members of the European Parliament. So I think we need to reduce this gap between the people of Europe and Europe. Thank you. Well, we'll take quite a few questions together because young people have asked questions in large numbers. we're talking about Europe a lot, but we can also talk about the Franco-German context as well more. Nicolas.
Je sais pas si ça marche. Ouais.
Am I on? Well, I just wanted to come in on this. I think it's important to know that you shouldn't expect it to be a one-way street, and perhaps if we expect too much of the European institutions, they're a big machine. We ourselves should show some commitment and take an interest in these issues. In France or Germany, there are scores of associations which work in this area. I think it's important to get in contact with them, whether we're talking about the Franco-German Youth Office or other bodies. There are lots of ways of getting involved and doing things. And if it's not working in one direction, then we need to make it work in the other direction. Thank you.
Ça marche, oui. Je trouve ça.
I think interesting somebody from the Nassage. Perhaps have a European version of that, where French youth councils could meet together with their European politicians, and perhaps we do that kind of thing at a European scale on a particular topic, for example, on young people's turnout at elections or sustainable development. And this would allow young people in various countries to come together, and those ideas could be taken home by the representatives of the European institutions. This would be a way of getting young people to make a contribution to Europe, and also allowing young people to have exchanges among themselves. You could have this every year or every 2 years in a different country each time, allow young people to meet political leaders. That's something which should be pretty feasible, shouldn't it?
Vous voulez peut-être réagir?
Réagir pour dire que la proposition.
Well, I think that's a very interesting idea, being exchange of good practices, if you like, between Nassage and other structures. It's not necessarily along the lines of what we're having here in Strasbourg this time, but it is something which we should encourage. Now, seeing as I have the floor, let me take advantage of it and pick up on 3 other things. You talked about youths or different parts of sectors of the young population. I go out to meet people, young people who are in much more sort of material social difficulties, and they have the same hopes that young people studying university have. They need social, economic resources, and that's why, as political leaders, as local leaders, we need to try and shut down some of these inequalities. And there are different ways of doing that. Secondly, what we mean by young people or youth. We said it was 11 to 25 years because we need to have some kind of bureaucratic cut-off point. But there's also a definition which doesn't come from us, but from young people. And they gave it this definition. It's the age when you do things for the first time. Now, I think that says a lot, actually, about what we could do for young people. You said we only mention Europe in election campaigns. We don't talk about Europe when things are going badly. National political leaders, in France in particular, Europe does play a role in our daily life, especially in a place here like Strasbourg, but only seems to make headlines when Europe has created problems. If things go wrong, it's usually Europe's fault in the eyes of national politicians. And I think that leads to a lot of the disaffection that we're seeing at the moment. Thank you. Barbara Schmidt. Yes, 2 short answers to the question which come up a couple of times as, who are young people? How old do you have to be a young person? Well, I think different countries interpret this differently. Now, it's a European youth event. Let's come up with a European approach to that. Well, in Erasmus Plus, we say between 13 and 30. That's quite a long period of time. In that period, well, that's when you can take part in some of the European Commission youth programs. The other point which you raised about the discussions between young people and politicians or policymakers and bringing them together for certain topics. That's a process that we already have. We call it structured dialogue. You're quite right. Many of the things that you say, many things we've heard today are actually reflected in policies and projects that we already have. 95% of young people weren't aware of this structured dialogue, according to some of our surveys. But this is a process with certain topics and schedules where young people come together with political leaders and policymakers and have a debate. The results of these debates are then fed up from the local level to the European level. This is connected to the rotating council presidency and the young youth events that take place under the council presidencies. So when you have online questionnaires, online surveys that you can take part in, but you're right that this is a big challenge to raise the profile of this project so that more people know about it. I mean, most people, and clearly yourself, are not aware that this already exists. So it's important, therefore, that we, get a dialogue going between young people and politicians. And that is an approach, which we already have in Europe. Thank you, Mark Ludwig, and then we'll come back over here for some questions from this side of the room. Mark first. Well, just echoing what has just been said, there are also regular European Youth Weeks. Has any have you heard of a European Youth Week? Raise your hand if that means anything to you. Nobody? Well, that's the week we have in Brussels, where young people from European countries are delegated, if you like, from their countries and write political memos, political notes about policies for young people in Europe. This is mainly addressed to young people who are already working in organisations, and the organisations come up with the subjects. That's something perhaps you could look into via the youth organisations in your own countries. There are youth representatives who are already committed to those projects. But I took place in these European Youth Weeks a couple of times. The high point of this is often we have a night session where we draw up political statements which are then translated into individual activities in each member state. Thank you. We'll take the two questions over this side, please. The gentleman there first.
My name is Norbert. I'm from Slovakia, so the second person posing now questions. So very appreciable, such a small country, and giving all the time questions in all discussions here. First remark, maybe from my side, I also understand German and French, but it's also somehow appreciable to give here more this European approach, because sometimes I have the little feeling it's more like German-French discussion here. So maybe for the future. I don't have any questions here actually, but I really appreciate what was said by Ms. Schmidt, because we are also involved. I am from the organization that's called the Young European Federalists, JEF. From JEF Slovakia, we also involve structured dialogue, and it's maybe also motivations and very good challenge for the other NGOs here, how to tackle with European issues and how to bring, to contribute from youth perspective also to decision making at a local or national level. So it might be a very good point how to cooperate with politicians in future. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
It's not only the young people, but it's the seniors, the adults. We need to make our voting more simple. It's too complicating. We got groups and then we got parties in these countries and stuff like that. It's so complicating. And what about from the other countries? It's not the same party, but it's the same group that they mean the same things and stuff like that. And then I would like to say to the guys of you behind the nice side of the table, stop saying the same things. You say exactly the same things. First you say it, then you say it, then you say it. Stop it, please.
On peut aussi vous inviter à venir.
Or maybe you'd like to come down to the table and then we could turn the room around a bit. It's true that the way the room is set up doesn't really encourage debate. But the question over here, please.
Oui. Je sais pas, ça marche maintenant ou oui. C'est pas une question.
This is not a question, it's more of a comment really. I agree with the fact that there is a communication problem between political institutions and political parties. But there is a further aspect which is also important. That's the EU political system. I think there are many people who have good intentions, but who don't vote. Because the EU Parliament's powers aren't large enough. And they think that even if they vote for the European Parliament, then the Parliament's going to have to share its power with the European Council, which doesn't have the same democratic legitimacy as the Parliament. And that is an aspect which is just as important as communication. We need to give people the feeling that their vote actually counts.
Peut-être encore une autre question.
Perhaps another question? Julia, please.
Ich fand es sehr interessant, was Sie gesagt haben.
I thought it was very interesting what you were saying about making a commitment, getting involved, and about this peer-to-peer group. Mr. Schmidt and Mr. Ludwig. As a junior ambassador, we go to schools and we talk about exchange programs, talk about mobility, and all the advantages of those kind of programs. But obviously, we have to be able to go to schools in the first place. At the moment, I'm in Paris, and a group of several of us young ambassadors have been trying to think up some campaigns we could carry out for the European elections. And we visited lots of schools in Paris, and the people say, well, disappointment would be an understatement, really. What we offer, peer-to-peer group, but when it comes to the teachers, we get some obstruction from them. So we're wondering really, what can we do about that? Because the offers we're making, the free time that we're giving up, it doesn't seem to be taken up on. Something's not quite right there. Have you got any ideas of what we can do? How can we get the message across to school children? Well, perhaps we can talk about your political structure. Was it the Youth Support Committee or the organisation's administration in charge of schools? Perhaps we can talk about that face to face. Because I think that you need to have the right contact partners with the administration before you can get into the schools and talk to the young people. We can talk about that later.
Rajouter que effectivement c'est.
Let me just add that this is a particularly French problem of getting into schools to talk politics in the broad sense of the term. These political debates don't exist in French schools, and I think Germany, as far as I'm aware, Germany seems to be ahead of France in that area. I think that this is one of the points where we need to make progress. Because when we talk about information about the elections, okay, you don't need to know all the ins and outs of the EU decision making, but when you're a citizen, when you're 18, you can start voting, but you have to be an informed citizen. And that's why there needs to be political education. And it seems to me that isn't happening in France, or at least not happening in school. So the debate takes place outside the school with other people. And it's not quite the same as when you're talking to people who go to school, or maybe young people who are already working, or who are following different paths. But exchanges among young people, this kind of event, gives us information about what actually works in other countries in terms of organisations. And that's will also allow us to take the system forward. And the young woman was saying, we're telling you what we can see and what's already out there. Well, there are lots of systems, but you have to let us tell you about them. You have to let us talk about them. And it's only by having this kind of debate with you that we can get new ideas to emerge.
Oui, juste devant.
Ich habe noch eine Frage.
I do have a question about participation. Now, I get the feeling, I don't know if the same as everybody else does, that when we participate, we get a chance to speak our minds, express ourselves, then we can learn new skills and about all that kind of thing. But I get the feeling that this starts at the very local level. I used to be in a youth council, and then I also participated in the national and the European level. And also quite cool for politicians to have young people to meet with. They're sort of like the youth alibi, that people come and talk to young people, letting them make decisions on their own without actually taking our opinion into account. And they forget what we've said. And this is indeed my own experience. And people listen to me because I'm young, but then politicians seem to think that young people have no experience, they don't know anything. That is quite frustrating. And it seems to put some people off. It hasn't put me off, but it seems that politicians like to be associated with young people because it's cool and it's hip, but they don't actually take their opinions into account at the end of the day. Perhaps there are statistics about this. Maybe other people think the same way as I do, but...
S'il y a des personnes qui veulent répondre chez les intervenants. Et après, oui, juste un petit détail. Il nous reste...
Well, we've only got 10 minutes left, about 10 minutes, so I'm trying to get as many people to speak as possible. We'll hand back to the speakers now. I think one good way of doing things is e-participation, because that works for young people. It's directed at young people who can get involved just by clicking and give their agreement that way. But also we can look at how comments and wishes and requests can be discussed transparently. We need to get it out into the open. It's part of political commitment in the movement. That's the question. I understand your point. I agree with you. Involvement only works if there's political commitment. If the administration says, yeah, we're happy to take that on board and work with that. E-participation, I've found, is a very good way of doing things to ensure that government reacts in a process and actually changes the way it does things. Comments off microphone. How does e-participation work? You're saying government puts things online. Does it put the results in a file? How does this work in practice? Well, there are different projects here. I'm not sure. Maybe the e-participation project can be presented. The project I implemented in Berlin was about local government consulting before processes happen. The park department got young people and local politicians to comment on their plans, and then those answers were made part of the project when the project was actually delivered. Well, I think a little later the e-participation project from the Franco-German Youth Office is going to be presented. Other questions? Yes, you over there. Can you hear me? Yes. Am I on? Yeah, I wanted to come back very quickly to the point that was just made about the European institutions by Nicolas. In the appeal, the 99 proposals from the Franco-German Youth Office, there was the idea that the President of Council and President of Commission should be directly elected by universal suffrage. I'm not sure how much is going to be done there. Is there a problem with a lack of recognition and a lack of representation, which is excluding people from the European process? So you're saying a democratic deficit exists in the EU as well? Over there, please. I just wanted to mention something. Earlier we were talking about young people who don't want to vote, so they're not turning out to vote. But there are young people as well who cannot vote. I'm not trying to be controversial, but at least in my case, I've been in France for a long time, and I'm as involved as I can be in my city, but I cannot vote. So here I am asking my question. There are some young foreigners living in the EU, and I'm generalising it to an EU level, who want to vote, who want to be involved, but who want their voice to be heard. I know this topic is complex, if not tense, and Europe will be my future, I could say, if I have the right to vote.
D'autres personnes qui veulent...
Anyone else who wants to react or ask a question or make a comment?
Oui.
Seulement faire une remarque. On a parlé...
I want to make a comment. We've been talking about young people in institutions for an hour or two now, but I think there's a really big gap. But in between is school, and they could play a role. And in the Valle d'Aosta, in Italy, where I come from, the institutions asked schools to explain to young people what the European institutions were and what Europe did. I think sometimes the people don't know Europe very well or what the institutions are. So I really think we've got to push hard on cooperation between institutions of government and schools to ensure that young people know what these institutions are there for.
So I have the similar remark maybe, because what we are actually talking about is voting for Euro, voting for European election and so on, and we know this all European ideas are quite new for us. So I don't know how many of you actually feel as European citizens. Because this morning, when there was the opening ceremony, the woman for the parliament, she opened all the event with the word that we are proud of our European identity. But I really doubt, maybe here in this room are the young people who are much more engaged in some association and involved. But I really doubt that the people who can't really participate in this event, they really feel European and they feel some necessity to contribute. I don't know how we can actually tackle this gap between the political level and between the people. Is there, I mean, for example, I didn't like math at school, but I had to learn it. And this is maybe some kind of proposition, like if you want to really speak about Europe and if you want young people to be more engaged, they have to somehow get information first about what they are voting for and why they should actually care about all this discussion going around.
Peut-être des intervenants qui veulent.
Would anyone else like to come in at this point? Anyone? I see a lot of hands raised. It's not going to be easy. Right at the back.
Oui, bonjour. Moi, je voudrais juste faire une remarque sur...
Just a comment from me on the link between young people and politics. Someone in the first row, a girl, mentioned this issue. I think young people can give everything they've got, and they do, but they're not getting anything back for young people from politicians. So they're never going to take a risk on young people, and it seems that for as long as we've got this format where we're basically waiting for the politicians, we can't really get fully committed. They want us to be involved in very carefully controlled projects. We're being used in a way. Young people are being used. We're there. They're using our votes, but that's it. That's as far as it goes. So I think young people have to use other channels if they want to make their voice heard, such as associations and so on, and perhaps have to do more radical than traditional things. Maybe in schools, maybe they're tempted to do things which destabilise the current political system to get out of it. The sort of ideas mentioned in Strasbourg, well, I'm happy for young people to have something to say about setting up a skate park, but I think we need to go beyond that. That's just something small that is done for them. They get the skate park, but that's as far as it goes, and no one's interested in young people anymore. So perhaps speakers could develop that point. Sometimes things have been done, but it remains as a minority interest nationally and at a European level. Well, I don't want to speak instead of young people. I would ask the young people involved whether they think that what we're doing in Strasbourg is just window dressing. The association for which I'm a treasurer received complaints from young people when they thought they were being used as a fig leaf, and they were right to complain. They're not there just for the 8th of May. They're not there to vote for us and then for nothing else. And it's not a skate park. You mentioned a skate park. It's a square where young people previously weren't allowed to do anything pretty much because it was noisy and annoyed old people. But the association consulted and got young people back in the square with equal rights to everyone else. They've got the same right to speak out, these young people. They've got the same status in the city, and when we plan public space, they have to be involved. We shouldn't exclude any category of person, and I'm completely convinced that the things we've done to get young people involved wouldn't work if they were just fig leaves or window dressing. I haven't got enough time to go through all the examples, but in Strasbourg we had people who started in the youth council at 11, 12 or 13 years, and they're still bending our ear in public meetings at 25, 6 or so years of age. So I think if they thought they were being used, they wouldn't be there. It has to involve everyone in the city. I think we need to go a bit further with consultation, and we need people to partner up. There are different levels of involvement here we've got to work on. I don't know if anyone else wants to take the floor. Any other questions? Nicolas?
Oui, c'était juste pour...
Yes, I just wanted to pick up on this comment on European belonging, so a sense of belonging. How can we get involved as Europeans? Well, in my experience in the Franco-German exchanges, European commitment is built upon relations between 2 countries or 3 countries and not just a sort of European commitment. I think the bilateral or relations between two countries is very important. That's one of the things we should be building on in the European Union, and use the Franco-German relation as a model. It's one of the most mature and the most sincere relations in the European Union. Thank you. Just one final comment here, perhaps? I wanted to come back on the effort that political parties should make in the run-up to the European elections about informing people about European institutions. I'm speaking as a French person. In France, the political parties make their campaigns just on the national party level rather than the European party level. And they don't really talk about, or don't really inform people about the European Parliament. They say, well, there's the UMP, there's the PS in France. They don't talk about the European political groupings which will have the influence in the Parliament. So, as far as I'm concerned, in France, I was really quite shocked by the fact that debate between the candidates to the European Commission was not broadcast on French television. I think that's really not right. It's not right that the French government should not get involved in this debate because it wasn't on the public service broadcasting channels. And I think that that's something every government should do. There should be, for example, a minister for political education. And why can't we do that kind of thing at the European level? To let everybody, not just young people in fact, to be able to be informed about European elections and also national elections while we're about it. One final question here then. Or just a comment really. We were talking about how we can reconcile political education and schools. Well, in my association, we have a program called Europe at School. We go into primary schools, secondary schools, and sixth forms. And with the DAAD in Germany, we do that as well. It's called Europa macht Schule. And maybe that can work in other countries. There are certain associations who do make a commitment to this. So it does exist.
Merci.
Well, thank you. And thank you to all those of you who took part in the debate. Perhaps if there are further questions, you can ask our speakers directly afterwards. But once again, thank you, everybody. Let me remind you that political participation is very important, not just for the Franco-German Youth Office. We also need to get young people involved in other areas, and we need young people to give their support to intercultural exchange projects, mobility projects, etc. Okay, thank you, everybody. Have a good afternoon.